Good morning. It's so good to be here. I'm sure you had a wild week like I did. This weather, my power was out, my yard was on fire, the kids were home. Just a state of blissful happiness. Um, you forget how awesome snow days are, um, or you think they'll be awesome when you're an adult because they were so awesome when you were a kid, except they're not. It's awesome. Anyway, very different day today here at C3. Um, it's going to be a little bit more participatory. I'm going to probe your own unique, creative, genius like threads running through the course of your soul, bringing new things into the world. So you'll need a lovely blank white page in front of you. So I brought my own to give to you. Free gift. So right now we're going to have a little interactive time. Come on up, get a piece of paper. You need a pen. I brought pens. I want them back. Okay? Here's my little collection of pens from my office at home. Grab a pen. If you have a pen, that's great already. I do recommend actually getting a blank piece of paper because nothing feels better than a blank piece of paper if you're going to do some writing. Pens are here. Pens are here. Don't be one of the cool kids in class that says, I'm not doing this. All right? Okay, well, I'm going to make you do two things at the same time. Get a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen. And I'm going to start with a question. What is creativity? Start thinking about it. What is creativity? As something occurs to you, I'd like a little feedback. What is creativity? You need 5. Wow. Regular novelist here. Okay. Oh, you got an extra one? Okay. Oh, are you going to pass them out to people? Save some time? I like people waiting in long lines, though. Wait, we're running low. Okay, so start dividing them in half. If you took 5 because you want to write a novel, is half enough? Well, I can't answer that. Depends on how creative you are, exactly. So some people are without pieces of paper. I thought I brought a lot. So if you have an extra, pass it out, divide it in 2. No one should walk away from this place without a piece of paper. Who needs one? Who needs paper? Okay, pass this back. Writing utensils, you can't just stare at a blank white page. It needs to be written upon. I will be collecting each of these and posting them individually on Facebook with your picture attached to it, just to scare you a bit. All right. Just a line from David White, poem I've used before here. Just a few little lines from the very end of this poem. What shape waits in the seed of you? What shape waits in the seed of you? The seed, S-E-E-D. What shape waits in the seed of you? To grow and spread its branches against a future sky. To grow and spread its branches against a future sky, something of a seed waits in you that wishes to grow and spread its branches against a future sky. And in fact, that seed of you is already growing, has already grown, and the branches of which are spreading out in some kind of future sky. And here he has some questions about this seed. Is it waiting in the fertile sea? Is it waiting in the fertile sea? In the trees beyond the house, this seed? in the life you can imagine for yourself. Even now, the life you can imagine for yourself. The branches against a future sky, of this life that you can imagine for yourself. In the open and lovely white page on the writing desk. Carl Jung pointed out there are really 4 facets of our human wholeness. And you've heard them all, and you know them all. Thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, he called it. I like to change it to imagination, because I think intuition can operate personally. I'm sure Carl Jung could take me down on this one. But I think intuition can operate in the feeling sense, and the sensing sense, and in the thinking self. But anyway, so thinking, feeling, sensing, and imagination. And the most suppressed in the Western world, as I've said many times here, is imagination, in my opinion. We think it's cute in second graders, and in adults we think, get a life, all right? Or we think about those people as being dangerous at times, or we sanction them and become patrons and say they can be creative on my behalf, I don't need to be. We call those people artists. Okay? So it's a natural part of your own wholeness. And of course, some people have greater access to these facets of wholeness than others, but everybody has them and everybody can cultivate them. That's an operating premise. So I wanted you to be thinking about it if you heard in the confusion of getting the blank white page, what is creativity? And I just want a little bit of crowdsourcing. When we use the word creativity, what do we mean by that? And I have a list already because I started the conversation in the pre-talk. So what comes to mind? Anything at all? Creativity is the Big Bang. Okay, the Big Bang. An explosion of something, energy, something was created, I suppose, that wasn't there before. Yes. Okay, life, imagination, self-expression, a new and different perspective. I like these. Anything else come to mind? Yes. A thought. Yeah. A river. Speaking of river, where's our lovely readings for the day? Oh yeah, see, this is Rilke. If I could only live my life like this, what I do flow from me like a river. No forcing and no holding back. That'd be nice. I mostly do, well, a little of both, actually. Depends on the day. Some forcing and a lot of holding back. What else? Creativity is powerful. What else? Yeah, emotion, I heard. Okay, seeing so something about, I like the idea of sight, seeing the world in a certain way. Or, as William Stafford says, I am your own unique way of looking at things. Seeing the world in a certain way and expressing that in a certain way, we can call that a creative act or creativity. Nourishing. Inner beauty and the soul, you said? Inner beauty and the soul. I like that. That connects with the David Whyte's line, what seed waits within you that wants to spread its branches against a future sky, this inner and outer dynamic, yes. A synthesis of? Okay, like a weaving together of things, a synthesizing of things. Vulnerability. I also hear in that, I'm adding to it, I'm not taking away from vulnerability, something of telling the truth. Telling the truth. Yes. Change. Okay. And this came up in our pre-talk. There's a dynamic between change and what was. You need what was if there's change. Otherwise, change is meaningless. So in other words, there's a conversation that's happening between form and some new expression of form. Another way of putting it is it's a conversation with the past. Something went on, and I am conversing with that in a new and creative and fresh way. So there's a kind of dynamic tension between, or another way of putting it is between chaos and order. Which, by the way, brings me to last week's talk. I wanted to talk about creation, the creation story largely in Genesis. I also mentioned some things about Mesopotamia. If you missed it, You can listen to it online. Um, I actually, I've heard the creation story from Genesis since the time I was a little kid, and I found even last week when I was looking at it again for the millionth time, not really, well maybe, I still was hearing new things. I was like, this is interesting, and that's the way myths work. They have these sort of layers to them that can speak, I think, at different times in your life. Anyway, I found the exercise interesting, but I told you already last week I had creativity in mind, but I didn't tell you why. If you ask the question, why are there creation myths and stories, period? Why do they exist? Most people will say, oh, because they were trying to explain the way the world came into being. That is a very, really modern idea. That fancy word we would, what's it called when you anachronistically apply to the past? I just sound very scholarly there for a second. We anachronistically apply that to, oh, they must be doing what we're doing when we're doing science. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe there's a little bit of that going on, but I'll tell you something in a very straightforward fashion. Why are there creative stories and myths? Why are there creation stories? Because human beings are highly creative, and they project onto reality what they themselves experience. And that's how we have a plethora of gods and goddesses. That's what at least depth psychologists will tell you. It begins with a kind of projection. What is it like to be us? We must project that onto reality or onto the gods and goddesses. So let me say it again in a more simple fashion. There are creation stories because you and I are wildly creative people. And so we imagine the world to be a creative place. Just like if I bring something into the world, like anything at all, a poem, a new staircase, a child, wow, this, and talk about the mystery of life. Where did this being come from? And eventually this being is going to talk back to me. Yes, a child. And there's and that kind of wondering and musing and pondering, what is the mystery of this creative fire that human beings, that's why they imagine stories and myths about the creation. There's a relationship between the reality as it is and its own creative fire and the human creative fire. So, all that to say, you and I are wildly creative. And what are we talking about? We're not talking about the artists, right? They're creative. And in our conversation today, I don't want us to think about the highly creative people who are anomalies. Because let's just be honest, some people are more creative than you are, all right? And definitely more creative than me. That's not an excuse to ignore a conversation about creativity. Let's just say some people have it, have greater spoonfuls of it. So we'll just leave it at that. We want to talk about your inborn capacities and how we might use them now. And the reason why I want to talk about creativity today, in part, is because in March, which is coming up quickly, we're going to replace our general talkback time with, for 4 weeks, an exploration into our own unique ideas here in this place and how we might imagine this place and what kinds of things we might want to do or be involved in out in the community. And we want everyone to be a participant in there. And then we'll go through a whole process where we'll whittle down to maybe 1 or 2 or 3 and say, all right, well, let's all get behind these things. So that's the process we'll go through, but that cannot start without you being engaged and saying, what are my ideas? And what are my ideas that I don't know are my ideas yet? Because there's something kind of interesting about any kind of creative act. Sometimes it's like, I want to make X in the world, and therefore I need this tool, and I need this material, and then I'm going to make that thing. Sometimes that's a creative act. But if you think about it, isn't it more true that you have an idea of how something might be in the world, you might want to make something, but the process itself, something else slightly different emerges. Do you know what I'm talking about? Especially in writing, where you're trying to say something. And in the struggle of trying to say something, the process of creativity, that's where something new is born. It's not as simple as, well, one of these days I'll just get around to making the thing and I already know what it's going to be. You venture into the unknown in any kind of creative act. You do. And the unknown is scary, which is why we farm it off to the artists. We say, you go venture into the unknown, I'll just enjoy your music. Don't ask that of me. I'll just listen to it on my headphones. That's just one example. Okay. Now, what do we want to do now? I think we want to talk about the 9 muses for a moment. I think in the fall I mentioned the muses anyway, but I don't think I mentioned them in detail. What are the muses? The muses are 9 daughters of Zeus, and their mother, I forget her name exactly, maybe someone remembers it, is connected to memory. Okay? And the river of memory that flows in the underworld, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that place. You've been there. So the river of memory gives birth to these 9 muses, and the muses probably, if I had to guess, and this is a little bit of an exaggeration, were probably at least some of the most honored goddesses in all of the Greek Empire, Greco-Roman world, and were honored and sort of worshipped and praised by everybody. You know, the Greek world was sort of divided up, and towns even had like sort of their god of or goddess of choice. Like this town's all about Dionysius, but every town honored the muses because, again, what I'm saying, something inside all of us is highly creative and wants to bring forth things in the world. So here are the 9 daughters of muses. Here's to what they are connected. So you get an idea of how broad the Greek world thought about something like creativity. Here they are. One is connected to poetry and words. And if a muse were to visit you, the muse of poetry, you would, perhaps the experience would be something like you're working, you're writing, and all of a sudden you write something and you wonder, where did that come from? That's what they would call, in the Greek world, inspiration. The muse visits you. The muse never plays by your rules, by the way. You don't say, well, at 4 o'clock tomorrow, you better show up. It's much more like a dance. And all of a sudden, the flow is there, and you're not forcing, and you're not holding back, as Rilke says, and something is born. So poetry is one. The second is the writing of history, believe it or not. History. The writing of history is a highly creative act. It's not as simple as recording the facts. If you recorded all the facts, no one could read them. There'd be too many. It's a highly selective and creative and imaginative act in terms of how one creates a story. So history, the writing of tragedy and working with tragedy. After all, life is tragic. You know that. I know that. And sometimes you get a visitation from the muse in the midst of tragedy, telling the story in a certain way. Same with comedy, that's another one. And many of you, I'm sure, as I am, are a fan of our comedians, who are the truth tellers in our culture right now. Many of them are. So they're playing with truth, and I'll say something about truth in a second, but here they are dancing and playing with truth, and every once in a while they have a flash of inspiration. And you think, wow, where did that come from? Like this morning I was reading, MLive had a little article on John Dingell's best tweets. And one of them was, I really support the Trump administration and their plan to go to Mars, and I wish them well on their journey. So that's the muse. That's the muse, you know? Just, that's a good one. Okay, I just want to finish then, the 9 daughters. Another one is the writing of sacred hymns. So we might expand that just to music in general. Where does it come from? Like seriously, where does it come from? Dance. The movement of the human body, playing with form and structure and energy. Where does that come from? Astronomy. I thought about one of the 9 daughters as the muse of astronomy. I expand that just a little bit in my mind to just include science in general. Which, by the way, as soon as you say creative, you think, well, who's the artist? Well, Who are the scientists is another way of getting at that. Um, Two more. Harmony, the muse of harmony, which is lovely. Like, where does it come from? We know what it is structurally, but some people hear it and some people don't, correct? We know how it works, but where does it come from? How can some people just so easily just spills out of them? And harmony is beautiful because it's a sacred dance between one note and another. Usually by two different parties. Yeah, I mean, it could be the same party, I suppose, but just think about two people singing together. And then finally, love. In case you think this is just about creating something physical, an object, what about love? Have you ever been visited by the muse and found yourself doing or saying or being or even feeling a certain way and you wonder, where the hell did that come from? I'm sure you were all wonderful poets when you were falling in love. Where did that go? Okay. All right, those are the 9 daughters. I wanted to just share them with you because when I start asking you some questions, I'm going to give you some things to write about here in a moment. I want to liberate you from thinking about creativity as just being about one specific thing. Where does your mind go? What do you sense and feel and imagine and think, and what comes to mind? So I want to go ahead and start some things, and I'll sort of give you something to write about. Maybe I'll talk about it. I'll give you something else to write about. So get ready. I want you to write, and I want you to write as if this was, I don't know if they still have these in school, but when I was a kid, you had these time tests, and like the clock is ticking and you're filling in the bubbles. And if you're like me and you hated school, you're like, I wonder if I could make a unique pattern with these bubbles. Wouldn't it be funny? Just go, din, 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 din. Funny until you got the grade. So I want you to free yourself up to just be, to court the muses and just to allow whatever to come. So here's the first question I want you just to start writing on without stopping for a set time. I'll not tell you the time because that'll increase the anxiety, but it'll be very short. Okay? So here's the first question. I want you to imagine what Lake Michigan might be like in 100 years. And I want you to finish this sentence. I would like Lake Michigan to be like fill in the blank in 100 years. In 100 years, I want Lake Michigan to be like, start writing. What comes to mind? Oh, I should say to the Facebook people, this applies to you too. All right, get out your pen. Lake Michigan will look like X in 100 years. Giving you other ways of thinking about it. My hope for this great body of water is fill in the blank. 100 years. My dream for the big lake is. Okay, along the same lines, here's another one. My dream for the lakeshore community in 50 years is. So I would like the lakeshore. I saw someone shaking out their hand already. They've got the school cramp. So in 50 years, I'd like this community, the lakeshore community, to be like fill in the blank. And even if you're not coming up with sentences, maybe just single words might come to mind. In 50 years, I hope the lake shore is like just single words. Just let them come and don't judge them. You'll have plenty of time for that later. Just let them come out. Maybe you'll find you're visited by a whisper you didn't know was there. One of the 9 daughters will show up. Okay, here's another one. We're just shrinking the circle down a bit. In 5 years, I hope Grand Haven is. 5 years, I hope Grand Haven is. Or I hope Grand Haven is like. If you don't live in Grand Haven exactly, maybe Spring Lake, or I mean, you have to be super literal. The place that we find ourselves, the place where you live, in 5 years. My vision for Grand Haven in 5 years is, if I were in charge, if I were the mayor, I don't know how much the mayor is actually in charge, but symbolically we'll say, you know what I mean. If it were up to me in 5 years, Grand Haven would look a little more like, fill in the blank. And let's do something a little related to C3 along the same lines. Let's just take the same time frame. In 5 years, I hope C3 is. And if something like an image comes, write the image down. If it's not a word, just take whatever comes. In 5 years, I think you might even need to close your eyes and use your imagination. And I hope C3 looks like. My idea for C3 is, they're all in the same vein here. If it were up to me, in 5 years, C3 would look like. Try not to let your should mind work like, well, it should be. Just be a little free. Okay. I just want to stir the pot a little bit. Let's come back to a little bit of conversation on creativity, and then I'm going to ask you another couple of questions. So, one of the interesting stories that appears in Greek mythology is a competition between the sirens and the muses. Okay? The sirens and the muses are related. So the muse, one simple way of talking about the muse or the muses, the 9, is they're the creative singers of something. They're creating a certain song, and that song could be poetry and history or whatever. I listed the 9. But the sirens also did a fair amount of singing. And if you remember the Odyssey, the sirens are the ones that sing beautiful music but cause sailors to die, to crash their ship into the rocks and to be killed. So the dynamic, what the Greeks were doing was recognizing that creativity isn't just as simple as, or healthy creativity isn't as simple as just creating. Because you can create something dangerous that causes people to die, that causes the society to shipwreck itself, or you can create something that is more life-affirming and life-giving and more truthful. And the tension between the sirens on the one hand and the muses on the other had to do with truth. So just like in Greek, by the way, truth, I think if I have this correctly, I should have looked this up because it's just popping in my head. I think the word truth is connected to the word for memory itself. So to really remember something, like the muses, is to remember the truth of something. Anyway, my point is, there's a dynamic tension between truth and falsehood. And I want to throw that into the mix here because as you're imagining, what would the world be like? What would the lake be like in 100 years? What would this lakeshore community be like in 50 years? What could this town look like in 5 years? What could C3 look like in 5 years? It's a question of pursuing what's true. And you might say, well, what do you mean by true? Let's just say, okay, we don't know exactly. Or part of us really does know. And another part of us also questions. But we definitely don't want to be in the business of singing the song of the sirens leading people to shipwreck. Correct? And if you think about the music, the music of our political system, there are a lot of sirens. Would you agree? And I think whether you're on the right or the left, you could probably say that, period. I think everyone would agree with that. People are singing falsehoods again and again and again, and they're attractive and they're alluring. And a sailor that's been away from the truth for a long time might be attracted to this particular song only to find out they get shipwrecked. By the way, the muses win the competition, truth beats out falsehood, and they strip the sirens of their feathers so they can no longer fly around the world and attract people. They're sort of stuck in one little place out in the ocean, luring people. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. What is your relationship like with the truth? Because to pursue a creative life in this sense, I'm using the Greek thread here, is to also pursue the truth. And the truth, even telling the truth right now, can be dangerous business. Being creative can be dangerous business. We just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. What if he was like, the truth of my convictions is one thing, but I don't really want to say them out loud. It might cost me something. And I'm just going to write things in my journal and have a kind of creative private life. We would never have heard of this person, correct? The truth and creativity, these are bold acts in the world, especially when the world is full of sirens, full of lovely music. I think about really any kind of ideology as having a kind of lovely music to it. Kind of identity politics in general. Oh, it's a lovely song. I wish the world could be reduced down to this one ideology. Meanwhile, it lures you and you end up shipwrecked and so forth and so on. So, why am I saying that? What's your relationship like with the truth? And how might you tell the truth? And how might you tell the truth creatively? Because the scary thing about what David Whyte said in his poem is that, well, I didn't read the very beginning of the poem, which he says something like, the seed. I should look it up. Where's my phone? He says, to be human is to become visible. Do you feel how Beth mentioned vulnerability? To become visible, to tell the truth out loud as best you can in a creative way, is to become visible. You know what's easier? To remain hidden. It is. A great place to hide is social media. It is. We know that. It's a big, giant, fat mask you can hide behind. that I can hide behind. So anyway, what's your relationship like with the truth? So I want you to look at your list of things just right now. This is the final thing we'll do. And I want you to look at your list. Just take a look at the words on there, words and ideas. And I want you to trust that something on there wanted to be born in the world. Maybe something on there wants to be born in the world. Maybe something big. So look down your list, and maybe something on there strikes you like a grand vision. Like the kind of vision that you can't do alone. Not a privatized vision, like I really hope my cactus grows to 3 feet instead of 2.5 feet. Okay, that might be great, and you should definitely go for that. But grand vision that is big, big, big. One that you, as soon as you say it, you say, well, I can't do that. All right? And I want you to circle it. Circle the things that strike you as a grand vision. A vision where you might need some help, some assistance. It might be more like passing the baton onto the next generation or generations if something like this is going to be born in the world. Is there a grand vision on there or the beginnings of one? After all, I think seeds of creativity are a bit shy. As soon as they start to emerge, it's like they're shy and you can scare them away. And you know how you scare them away? You can scare them away and say, well, that's not me. Boom, they're gone. Like, oh, we visited you, but we'll go back to our special home in the underworld. Okay? So, but treat them kindly right now. Anybody, just by show of hands, see something on that piece of paper that was like a grand vision, something big. Okay. Now, here's the second kind that might have emerged. Something that's something like a project. A project. Something that has more than one step. Okay? Some project. Is there a project on there? Look for it. Project. And maybe you need more than one person for this project, but it's not like a grand vision that's going to take many generations. It's a project. It's something like a project on there. And circle it. And put a little, then you'll just have a series of circles. Label it project. Maybe you want to label the other one grand vision. You want to label this one project. Later on, you can determine how doable the project is. It doesn't matter. So project. Maybe there's more than one project on there. Maybe there's a project that is a project built upon a project, built upon another project, and you get enough of those and you have a grand vision. Okay? And now we're whittling it down even further. And is there anything on your list that would qualify as a one-time action? One-time action. Just look on there. Or let me ask it another way. Is there something on your list, and as you look at it, that a one-time action could affect? Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Look for one-time actions. Use your thinking powers right now. Is there something on here that I can actually do something about right now? Or when I get home, or as soon as Kent stops talking, or whatever, or next week, or this summer? Look for it. And try to be as specific as you can. And if there's a one-time action, write the action down on the piece of paper. I know if I take this action, I will have brought forth something that didn't previously exist. By the way, some of the best kind of one-time actions are ones you can't take back. I know if I do this, my life or the life of my community or my family or something small will never be the same. It doesn't have to be dramatic, but it's only you can do it. No one else can. Look for one-time actions. Or maybe even now, if you don't find any, you start thinking, is there any one-time action? Because these are the questions I want to get to now. And I don't want to do them here. I want to challenge you to take this list home. And maybe it's not near long enough. I mean, we could have taken an hour just doing the questions that I gave you, for one thing. But take the list home and treat it kindly. Be like, I don't know where this came from. I just showed up at C3, and then this guy told me to write some things down. And so here you have this list. And where did it come from? It came from your imagination and your heart, or your mind, or whatever. It emerged. Treat it kindly. And start going through there and start asking yourself, is there anything I can do, anything at all, that would be like planting a seed that would spread its branches against a future sky? See, if we go back to Rilke's opening poem, notice what, or in our gathering words, notice what he says here. Oh no, it was in the reading, I'm sorry. Already my gaze is upon the hill, the sunlit one. That's kind of forward thinking. My gaze is on the hill. The way to it barely begun. Because actually, especially your grand visions, it's like you've barely started. The way to it barely begun lies ahead. We are so grasped by what we have not grasped, full of promise, shining in the distance. There's a lot of reason, especially emotional reason, to be a total pessimist right now in our world, in our culture, and to be a nihilist, I would put it even more strongly. There's no meaning, it's all nothing, everything is pointless, major temptation for many of us. And here Rilke is calling us, yes, yeah, there's also a promise out there, a kind of a future thing shimmering in the distance. He says this, it changes us even if we do not reach it. Why do anything creative at all? It changes us even if we don't reach it. And remember what happened to Martin Luther King. Did he see what he envisioned? No, not really. And even what he envisioned, we haven't even seen as a culture. We've barely begun to see elements, correct? It changes us, even if we do not reach it, into something we barely sense but are. A movement beckons, answering our movements, but we just feel the wind against us. We feel the wind in our face. That's the way it is. The struggle with creativity does feel like the wind at times is blowing in your face. It's that tension again. What wants to be born? What is? What can I do about it? How difficult is the road going to be? These are the tensions of just being a creative human being, which all of us are. That's as far as I want to go today. Thanks for listening.